regulatory saturation. It's August 27th, 2026. Welcome to YesToHellWith.com. The system you cannot see. There is something happening in America that almost everyone has experienced, but very few people can identify it. You feel it when someone tells you how tall your grass can be. You feel it when government tells you where you can park your own vehicle. You feel it when someone tells you what kind of structure you can build on your own property, what size your house numbers must be, where you can put a fence, whether you can put up a sign, whether you need permission to operate a business from your home, whether you can keep certain animals, whether you can have an open container of beer while sitting on your own property. Each time it happens, we tend to look at the individual rule, the zoning ordinance, the building code, the parking regulation, the alcohol ordinance, the licensing requirement, the environmental regulation, the tax provision. And when each rule is examined separately, there is usually an explanation for it. Public safety, public health, order, property values, environmental protection, revenue, community standards. And that is precisely why we rarely see what has happened to us. We examine the strands without seeing the web. I want to give that web a name. It's called regulatory saturation. Regulatory saturation occurs when laws, ordinances, regulations, codes, licenses, permits, administrative rules, and enforcement mechanisms accumulate to such an extent that virtually every aspect of ordinary life falls within some category of government regulation. And here is what makes it so difficult to recognize. Nobody had to design the entire thing. Congress passes one law, a state legislature passes another, a county adopts an ordinance, a city adopts a code, an agency writes regulations, a board establishes standards, another agency creates licensing requirements, another creates reporting requirements, another publishes penalties. Each government body may be addressing only the subject directly in front of it. But you don't live inside just one of those regulations. You live inside all of them at the same time. Think about your house. To you, it is your home. But through the regulatory system, it may simultaneously be real property, a zoning classification, a taxable parcel, a structure subject to building codes, an address subject to identification requirements, property subject to maintenance ordinances, and perhaps property governed by environmental, utility, fire, occupancy, parking, or land use requirements. Nothing about the house changed. What changed was the number of governmental categories surrounding it, the web. Now expand that beyond your house. Your automobile, your work, your business, your children, your property, your income, your animals, your land, your transactions, your licenses, your permits, your recreation, your everyday conduct. Eventually, something extraordinary happens. Government does not have to announce, "We intend to control every aspect of your life," because they already do. It merely has to regulate thousands of separate aspects of your life. The cumulative result can begin to look remarkably similar, and that creates an even more serious problem. When government confronts you about something, the discussion usually begins with, "Here is the law," or "Here is the ordinance," or "Here is the regulation." And because we have lived our entire lives surrounded by regulation, most of us immediately begin arguing about what the rule says. But perhaps we have started one question too late. Before asking, "What does the rule say?" perhaps we should ask first, what gives this government body authority to regulate this particular matter in this particular way against this particular person under these particular circumstances? Those are not the same questions. The existence of a regulation and the lawful application of that regulation are separate inquiries. That does not mean the regulation is invalid. It does not mean government lacks authority. It means something much simpler. Authority should be demonstrated, not merely presumed from the existence of the rule itself. And regulatory saturation, that web of which I spoke, makes that distinction extraordinarily difficult to see. Because once virtually everything has been regulated, the existence of regulation begins to feel like proof of authority. There is a rule, therefore they have authority. There is an ordinance, therefore it applies. There is a regulation, therefore you must comply. Maybe. But that is precisely what must be examined. The Liberty Dialogues begins somewhere different. What is the authority? What is the jurisdiction? What facts activate that jurisdiction? What is my status under the law? What obligation actually follows? What enforcement authority exists? And has each step been demonstrated without filling the gaps with presumption? That is how we begin taking apart regulatory saturation, or the web. Not by screaming that every regulation is unconstitutional, not by refusing every law, not by making conclusions before examining the evidence. We do something much more disciplined. We take one strand of the web at a time and trace it back to its source, because you cannot meaningfully challenge something you cannot see, and you cannot clearly discuss something you cannot name. Now we have a name for it: regulatory saturation. That is the syndrome. That is the pervasive web that we do not see. And in the next video, we're going to do something most people have never done. Instead of looking at one regulation at a time, we're going to step backward and look at the entire web. Because one regulation may appear perfectly reasonable, but thousands of them operating simultaneously raise an entirely different question. At what point does regulation cease merely regulating particular conduct and begin defining the boundaries of everyday life itself? And as always, may truth reign supreme.